Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV.
Please join me in welcoming Maureen MacNabb.
So first, let me thank the team at HFO for inviting me to speak today and trusting my perspective on the current market and that it's both relevant and worthy of sharing with everyone. When Greg invited me to speak, I was not really sure what direction I wanted to go with the subject matter, as there is a lot going on in our industry at the moment. So I thought I would start with some of the trends that we are seeing in our office and currently in our industry, and I will work my way to the local political atmosphere that is changing the way in which we are doing business, if not now, certainly in the foreseeable future. For those of you that don't know me, I've been managing property for the better part of 28 years. My primary focus is the close-in, urban core, turn-of-the-century buildings better known as vintage apartments. This has been the mainstay of my business and has provided a very stable rentership for 2+ decades for me. The close-in neighborhoods have provided a lot of resiliency during softer markets, as the demand is always high. The only change that I can see currently is that while the older inventory remains affordable, and I say that loosely, relative to newer, higher-end product, there is a compression that is being seen here, with very attractive concessions being offered across the city and in every neighborhood. Our current residents are certainly being lured by these new freebies. Let me start with the changing landscape of the City of Roses. The attached picture, circa 1990, when I first started in the business. The next slide shows Portland today. I counted no less than 12 cranes as I drove at the speed limit going over the Fremont Bridge recently, and that was what I could count quickly. The new skyline and new buildings are the most obvious tangible changes that we can see in our city. The number of apartment buildings popping up is astounding. I can drive anywhere in the city and find a new development project on nearly every major city corner. This has been the theme for the better part of 5 years and has been on an upward trajectory, as we know, as we have tried to meet the demands of a housing shortage. However, the tide is changing. What might not be quite as visible at first glance is the market is showing signs of softening. The number of new projects that are offering concessions are endless. Consider 6 weeks free rent and a $1,000 Visa gift card as one example. We're just wrapping up a new lease-up project on 37th and Hawthorne, 27 units, and we've been offering $1,500 gift cards at move-in. This allows for residents to use it to pay their first month's rent, believe it or not, pay for moving expenses, and potentially furnishing their apartment. The question remains, where are the new residents coming from? Interesting to note, Q1 of 2018, we have processed 358 applications. 28% of those applicants came from out of state. The average age of the applicant was 33, and the average monthly income, $2,700. So, the millennial is alive and well and continues to be our #1 renter. All this to say the information supports the notion that in-migration is continuing, and at least for the time being. Another trend we have noticed is the increase in renters becoming homeowners. Consider the following. 2016, of the 89 residents that moved out of our portfolio, 4.45% indicated that they had purchased a home. Compared to 2017, 102 residents, 12% indicated that they had moved because they had purchased a home. 2018, 115 residents that moved out of our portfolio, 18% indicated buying a home. We have seen a steady uptick in the move to purchase and more movement in general, suggesting that renters will move because there are more options, and in many cases cost-effective with the incentives being offered. I don't see home ownership as a preferred choice for millennials. Renting is still the preferred lifestyle for the moment. I see millennials very satisfied with the idea of being mobile, as well as a segment of Gen X and baby boomers feeling the same way. So there isn't really a shift there. It's still millennials being our real focus in the close-in market. The rate at which renters were moving out previously is dramatically different than currently. In those few years where the demand was so fierce with limited supply, renters were holding on to their prized apartment as they should. We are starting to finally see supply catching up with the housing demand. All sources remain firm, however, that we need more housing, and I tend to agree. Once we have more housing, the prices will naturally correct themselves to be more in line with a proper supply. On higher rent sustainability, I have a handful of projects that I've been involved in the last 3 to 4 years. The newer inventory we represent, we have had difficulty sustaining the original prices that we got 18, 20 months ago. On re-rent, it is not unusual to see rents dipping 3 to 5% and higher in some of the really higher-end product 2+ bedrooms. This is attributable to the generous concessions being offered across the city, but those will wane when absorption occurs, and it will. So don't panic, everyone. This is the ebb and flow of our business. A few other predictions as follows for the foreseeable future. Increased advertising costs, which include concessions, cash incentives, gift cards, and I'm sure there will be some new clever enticements as well. Increased legal expenses. Andy, you'll be pleased to hear that. With the new laws in place and not easily navigable, costs for legal consultation will increase. I know we've seen that in our portfolio. Increase in maintenance expenses to keep up with the very spiffy, snappy new projects naturally places stress on the older product. And of course, we can't forget resident retention, which is paramount as we move into a softer market, that we look after our existing residents. Existing rents will see, in my opinion, very little growth over the next couple of years. So in some of the older projects especially, I might suggest there will be no rent growth, but that may be a calculated decision on investors' part to seek a strong occupancy rate and maintain one. I started out my presentation with a reference of the changing landscape of our city. I'm also inferring that there is a changing political landscape occurring in our industry that deserves some attention today. This is not my favorite part of the presentation, so bear with me, but it certainly can't be ignored. I suspect many of us talking today will be talking about the political side of what we're facing, and it's worthy of serious attention. So I'll give you a quick recap. March 2016, so over the last 18, 24 months, 90-day notice required to be sent to a tenant for a rent increase. February 2017, a temporary ordinance was put in place in the City of Portland. A rent increase in excess of 10% required the landlord to pay a relocation fee to the tenant if the tenant decided to move. The administrative burden this caused was significant as it had a retroactive date of November 2016. So any of us that issued rent increases between November and January had to go back to the drawing board, make sure that we didn't tip that relocation fee and our rent increases were not over 10%. December 2017, the relocation ordinance becomes permanent. Oh, well, that's a big shocker. Relocation fees would be paid between $2,900 and $4,500, depending on the size of the apartment. And of course, if an end of tenancy notice was issued with no reason, or a rent increase notice in excess of 10% was issued, the tenant declined to accept it, the relocation fee is tripped. There's a group for us. The city took a very aggressive and hardline approach to implementing these measures. Despite rational testimony from many small and large independent rental owners and property managers, as to why the need to keep this management tool should be preserved. As we know, this failed at the city level, but remains intact beyond the city of Portland. But for how long? It will likely be determined in this next legislative session in 2019. So, March 2018, Mayor Ted Wheeler announces a landlord registration initiative requiring all landlords to register their multifamily properties. With that, they pay a fee per door. The amount has not yet been sent as far as I know. This would partially fund unit inspections by the city. This is not rolled out as yet, but it is on the horizon. The mayor has already set aside taxpayer money to create the infrastructure for this agency, so it is very much in motion. What is now on the chopping block is our ability to screen residents with criteria that we have set to make sure that they qualify to move into your building. The city believes they should be setting the criteria for all of us. Here is a snapshot of what the city is proposing we use as our criteria to screen residents. And I understand that HFO has distributed this roadmap, so to speak, and I would get extremely familiar with this roadmap because we are all going to be using it in some form or other, unless we start taking action and let our voices be heard. On the application frame piece alone, the city is imposing administrative burdens on management and owners alike that are already fraught with paperwork. The bureaucratic indifference to this process is so frustrating. The timepiece to screen under our current criteria can be long and now will be further arduous. Our obligations we set in our management contracts to identify the most qualified resident is at risk, and I really mean it's at risk. Coupled with this proposed policy is a proposed policy that will address security deposits, the amount we ask, and how it will be applied when a tenant exits your building. I have not seen any final draft policies as it relates to this subject as yet, but it is on the table currently being formulated. I realize we have a housing crisis, and I realize we have a homeless crisis in our city. The property management industry, however, has been unfairly targeted to solve the city's housing and homeless crisis. We all need to be proactive and find ways to educate the public on the unintended consequences on these ill-advised policies. Our jobs have exponentially become more difficult. The red tape that will come with these policies will be a reality for all of us working in the industry. The legal expense will rise as we attempt to oust the ill-behaved, non-compliant residents and slowly watch the fallout that will be our burden and our burden alone. Out of default, we become social workers, psychologists, mental health professionals, and I also might go as far as say law enforcement officers. Do our residents know what the risks are to them? How are we going to communicate this information? Now just for example, a convicted felon now lives beside them, and the first time there is an incident, a resident or client will demand to know, how did that person qualify? How did they get into my building? And you can thank the city for that. Let me loop back up to one of the points that I mentioned earlier. Now, if I have a problem with an unruly tenant, my previous tool to end tenancy without cause has vanished. They eliminated that. And I have to pay to eliminate this bad behavior on top of that, and you, the landlord owner, have to pay for it. For all of us in this room, we have known Oregon for its lush, healthy green forests and beautiful landscape. This is what I remember when I look back on first coming to Oregon in 1987 and just starting in my housing career just a few short years later. I now liken our political landscape to look more like this. Our elected officials are methodically clear-cutting our industry's landscape. How apropos when we have a mayor that comes from a lumber background. My message today is simple. I remain extremely committed to being a reputable housing provider. I have chosen this industry because it is rewarding to serve our residents, working for amazing clients, and networking with outstanding business professionals and learning from them. Collectively, we have a powerful message, but we cannot campaign our rational message alone. We need everyone to get involved in this narrative. If nothing changes and the policies go forward as they are currently drafted, all I would like to say is, please don't shoot the messenger. Thank you.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.